Everybody awake? I really appreciate you reciting my resume. I wasn't expecting that. One of the things we agreed to as a group was that we were going to do quick introductions. So I'm really happy to have this panel together. It's been a very interesting conversation over the last couple of weeks talking about what is an agency. But let me just introduce everybody first. Colleen Courcy, who's the founder of Socialistic. Colin Kinsella, who's the CEO of North America for Digitas. Montague, who's the founder of Collective, Reuben Steiger, who's one of the principals at Method, and last but not least, John Winsor, who's the founder of Victor and Spoils, and is also the Chief Innovation Officer for Havas, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So since the title of this panel is What is an Agency, let's just very quickly answer that question. I'm going to start with you, John.
An agency is to me an intermediary, and I think with technology today, technology disintermediates the role of an agency or what an agency is. I just don't think there's a future in being a traditional agency. That person that sits between two other people that's an intermediary. So I can talk further about that, but I don't think there's a role, right? I think that there's a role to facilitate and curate and direct, but other than that, the role's changing really radically right now.
Ty.
It's a hard question. I think what an agency is today is totally up for grabs. I think we're in a period of massive flux. I think what an agency used to be is a trusted advisor to the CEO to help build brands and businesses, and that position is totally up for grabs today. It is no longer dominated by the traditional agencies. I think the digital agencies are trying to get in there and might. And I think right now McKinsey and Bain have a sort of stranglehold on it. But I don't think that, I think even their dominance of that position is up for grabs.
Reuben, Method talks about innovation balanced with function. And after just listening to Gaston, he talked about having a seat at the big table will create the winner. Where do you see that with regard to your agency?
So I think Method, if I were to talk internally, we would struggle with being called an agency in the conventional sense. We think of ourselves as a design firm, and I think to your question of what is an agency in our world is someone external, an external group that a client hires to do a consultative task that you couldn't or wouldn't do internally. In our case, that's development of brand, product, and service based on the assumption that experience is what matters.
Yeah, I always used to tell clients that you have to think of us sort of like a personal trainer. You could do it on your own, but you don't. So it's a different way of looking at it. Colleen, you're probably the newest to founding an agency that's sitting up here on this panel, and I know you've had an interesting year. So talk a little bit about how you see yourself as an agency and where you find the intersection with clients.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in our instance, our job as an agency is to connect brands to people, to bridge that gap between the brand's perception of who it wants to be and the public's perception of who that brand is. And we manage that through multiple conversations around content or functionality or interactivity or messaging, but we do that over a period of time. And I think what's been most interesting for my agency this last year is figuring out how you do that from the position of a trusted advisor, how you do that in new and interesting ways when your clients are asking for innovation but not necessarily staffed or modeled to work along beside you with that. And we started becoming more consultative than I ever thought we would be. I also, like Reuben, thought, we are a design studio, we design content for social distribution, this is how we do it, ROI on, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, we're trying to solve a transition problem and try and make the best work we can while we do it. it's been an up and down year of working our way through what it's like to be that level of advisor with that level of client without a massive agency behind you, dealing with all the technological things like patent indemnification, et cetera, staffing models against offering varied services so you're not just selling over and over again the thing you know how to operationalize, which I think is the benefit of a smaller company, that we can be problem fit. But yeah, it's been really enjoyable, but it's never what you think it's going to be when you set out.
So Colin, you and I were talking last week about the fact that of the people represented up here, Digitas is probably the most traditional agency on this panel, which I don't think any of us ever thought we'd be saying about Digitas, but that is probably true with regard to this group. One of the things you said in our conversation is that back in the day, we were agents of the media. That's how we got paid. The media paid us 15% on everything we sold, and clients kind of said, okay, but can you do creative too? And you were talking about now we're really agents of the audience. And if that's true, how do we help clients with their messaging with regard to integration across all the various audiences that they have to talk to?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, I think. One of the most difficult areas for all of us is that we believe Digitas specifically as an idea agency, and we believe in creating ideas that, as we talk about it, move people in new ways. So we're trying to affect behavior. The complexity of the marketplace for us and our clients, it feels like it's growing exponentially. So for clients to figure out how do they talk to one individual, an audience, becomes critical. And what tools and technologies do we leverage to help them talk to that audience and make a real connection? So it's about that audience, that person's story versus the brands, or at least find that right connection. We also realize that you can't do it alone. It's just impossible. You need media partners, technology partners, you need other agencies, you need media companies. Like, you need all of these agencies to come together to really win, because ideas to have real impact have to be integrated. And we've got many examples where we had phenomenal ideas and it just doesn't have the impact that you thought it would have. And then we do things like Small Business Saturday, in which we launch a very big brand platform idea. And it's our idea, and we're doing all the digital work, but we need help on the other side to make that work. And so the role of an agency, to me, is really becoming a conductor of sorts. And you have to have incredible confidence as an agency. And this is where I think you run into a lot of issues, because sometimes we have it, sometimes we don't ourselves. But you have to allow others in. And in the allowing others in, you lose control. And in the loss of control, I forget who the song is by, but hang on loosely, but don't let go. That's really where we are kind of as agencies, in this sense of how do you give up some control when you know that everything is also in the execution?
Yeah, it's interesting. I shared this quote with a couple of you. It was from Rashad Tabakawala from Viveki. He said, "We must be open to outside partnerships because incest breeds horrible ideas." And, I think back on the last 30 years I've spent in this business, and in the old days, AOR, that's what everybody wanted. And I think that notion of an AOR is really dead. And at least I think most of the people on this panel have accepted that. I'm sure there are other entities who would disagree. But in this day and age of collaboration, it's very interesting. And Ty, I saw an interview that you did with Alex Bogusky not that long ago when you were still at JWT, and you were talking about the partnership between JWT and Crispin with regard to Microsoft and how you were approaching it. And here were these two creative forces, Ty Montague and Alex Bogusky, talking about collaboration and cooperation. Was that kind of the impetus for Co and where that came from?
I would say a little bit. I mean, always, as a creative person, I always was a little bit kinky. Like, I like collaboration. I always have. I've always liked finding companies on the outside who are doing interesting things and figuring out a way to sort of pull them in. And so I had a natural proclivity for it. And Alex, did way before we met. He was doing the truth work with Arnold, yeah. And that was another amazing collaboration. And so I think we just shared that gene. And, I think collaboration fundamentally comes from confidence. You said it. once you're sure that you have achieved mastery in your field, you don't have to worry very much about where an idea comes from or who gets credit for it. There's another quote, I think Harry Truman said this, it's amazing how much you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. And that's, at one of we don't have a lot of rules at Co, but one of our fundamental sort of cultural touchstones is we don't talk a lot about what we're doing. And we do that for that reason. We want to create a culture that is humble and doesn't seek to take credit for the things that we're working on, because fundamentally we believe that it's in sharing credit that real greatness can happen.
Well, it's interesting, John, you founded Victor and Spoils on that very idea. And I remember at the time it was very controversial. And that controversy seems to have died down. What do you attribute that to?
I think it's just the changing of the guard, right? I think that technology is making it possible for more people to participate in the democratization of all of our creative services. I went on Kickstarter last night, and I'm in the midst of thinking about a new book, and I thought, wow, it'd be great to maybe shift the paradigm and crowdfund the book. Well, of course, Seth Godin has already done it, right? And he raised $260,000 for his new book in 2 months on Kickstarter, which essentially means he doesn't need a publisher. He just essentially has changed the paradigm. He's directly connected with his fans. And I think that's something we have to all face, is that the world wants to be democratized, right? There are creatives that want to participate on brands. There are brands that want to connect deeper with individuals. And when there's an easy way, when there are new social medias or there are new platforms that are built that facilitate that easy connection, then those things are going to accelerate. And I see that every day. We just did a project that we launched, I guess, 2 nights ago for a tech company. It's a publicly locked project, so you have to go in on our platform. 6,500 creatives got a note through the platform and said, do you want to participate? In about 3 hours, we had 350 people sign up. In another 6 hours, 190 people NDA'd. So all of a sudden, in 12 hours, we had a 190-person creative team working on a project. And to me, it's not about us. It's about there's this deep need for people who want to participate, who want to be involved in being creative. And I think that's all of our jobs, whether we're a traditional agency or a most cutting-edge social agency. How do we get more people involved with more interesting ideas, more creativity for our clients, right, to solve big business problems? Because I agree with Colin that the problems today are just overwhelming. It's more than any one of us can solve.
I also find it very interesting that ego seems to have taken a back seat now. And it used to be that walking into a creative director's office, and it was kind of threatening for us little account people. But it doesn't feel like that anymore, because it feels like everybody's participating. If you're in a traditional agency, everybody in the agency is participating. If you're in a Victor and Spoils situation, you're drawing from the crowd. What do you think is the best piece of advice you can give to people who are either just coming into the industry or just thinking about starting an agency these days, in terms of those relationships and the way that you work with each other and with clients? Reuben, I'll let you start.
I think advice is, it's always hard to give because you're giving it from a privileged point of view. So to say something like, fear is the mind killer. Don't be worried, quote Dune or something, and say, give other people credit. Well, let's be realistic. To move up the ladder, you have to be recognized. I think the adaptation of that would be able to make stuff. I mean, to your point, this is a generation of creativity and actual making. From a client perspective, I mean, one of the things we hear a lot is that, and it's become almost worn out, is that everyone wants to be Apple, right? Apple is the perfect fusion of a brand as a promise, a product, and a service. And and the three are, an experience that's perfect. The advice I would give to a young person is to challenge pre-existing conceptions about what's perfect or idealistic, and look at the reality of a market, which is most of the world is not Apple. How can you, on behalf of your clients, work the way companies like Y Combinator are, where three people, really a technologist, an interface person, and a business person, can make stuff that ships with big value.
Well, I've heard several people say, just 2 weeks ago at our conference in LA, somebody was talking about the fact that it's really not about awards anymore. It's really about doing things that have never been done. And it used to be that you wanted to top that certain spot that was the television, but now it's about doing things that have never been done. And I know that's a lot of what you're founded on. So talk a little bit about how the people in this audience who are largely in a position of selling their platforms, selling their media, how should they be talking to you?
Oh, I think that that really what you're looking for is interesting places that your clients can have conversations with their consumers. The technology platforms that are available, the things that you can start spreading those ideas across. And we see it in the Valley, I see it in the New York tech scene, I see it when people come in to show us product. You've got to be thinking somewhat from the purview of a marketer when you create those things. And it's not just about the monetization. It's about what are the KPIs that are required from a marketer that I need to build into these platforms. How does this enable them to solve their business issues? And I think that where we do best is when we pick up something and we start to make that happen. So often we will sit behind a platform or an application or a new piece of technology, and we will create that middle area where we say this is the benefit to the brand, this is how they can use it, this is how we can roll some of these models into something that vaguely resembles frequency and reach so that they can compare it to everything else. And being that facilitator allows us to unlock some of the amazing things that are coming now. And I think that would be the advice, come and say, this does these amazing things. What are the things I'm missing for you to place clients with us and do the things that you need to have done? And I think you can ask that proudly, because I think that ego is the result of not owning your actualization. And if you are a business person and doing this for yourself, you don't need the ego. You need the results. You need to get where you need to go. And I think that asking rather than pitching through really works with us anyway.
Colin, you're one of the few agencies up here that does both media buying and producing the content that you're working for with your clients. How should this audience work with you guys? As I quite frequently will tell the technology companies that they're making a huge mistake if they're only talking to the media agencies, because they leave the creative part of it out of the equation. And it's the creative part of it that's probably going to figure out how best to use the platform. So within your agency, what's the best way to come talk to you?
We talk to everybody in this room all the time, and I do as well. I think I must spend 20% of my time, no exaggeration, meeting people from other companies, and media companies, technology companies, social companies, mobile companies, all the time, just to get a sense for what's going on out there and how we can better connect. We built a product earlier this year called Brand Live, which is a way for our clients' brands to be much more in the moment, in the marketplace, inside of conversations that are happening around their category or their product. And the whole notion there was that, as we have a saying that relevance has a deadline. So something happens in today's marketplace, it feels like 3 days later, no one remembers what that was. But in that moment, there are really interesting opportunities for brands to push and get inside of conversations. And the other saying we have is, we build something every day. So in this, relevance has a deadline, what are we building that day to get into the marketplace to help our clients' brands stay incredibly salient with their customers? In that mix, we leverage an amazing amount of technology. It's not just us trying to do it. It's a kind of a creative newsroom. We have 10 technologists, 10 technologies that we employ, but we also have a lot of media companies that we employ. If you want to try to advertise on Facebook and other places, you need help, and not just how do you get my banner onto the right place, but what other things can you do to drive much more specific targeting to specific messages. So we are very much a kind of open door. We have every day we have what we call media in residence. So there is somebody from a media company in our office kind of walking the hallways, and they know all of us incredibly well. We've got really strong relationships with the bigger media companies and have ongoing projects that we deploy with them. But it really is it's a relationship of equals, interestingly enough. We have the relationship with the client, but without the ideas coming and the technology that comes from within media companies, we would not be successful. So we're very, very strong about that collaboration.
Use something about that, and it's just because we're talking about agency of the future, and I agree with you about relevance having a deadline, and I've spent a lot of time in my career talking about that, how you are in speed with culture and the 1,000 little things instead of the one great big push, and it's true. And I think the real difference that I found is that it was very difficult to get that message across in a traditional advertising structure. And I thought it was because of the fact that the ideas, and it was said the ideas were deemed not thoughtful, that you couldn't be distinct, that they weren't big enough, that they were just part of a conversation. And I think it's actually that they weren't operationalized to be able to work that way. And I think what a lot of us are trying to do is get that operationalization. But you're a big company that has that now. Is it because your roots were in media and digital, or have you consciously had to get
No,
there?
I think it's because our roots were in
Sorry.
media and
Sorry.
digital.
You
And
can moderate if you want.
I think it was because our roots were there, and we are predisposed to thinking about building products. And because we're predisposed to that, and then figuring out how you monetize it, we'll do it first and then figure it out. And then sometimes it dies, and then sometimes it doesn't, obviously, with any kind of new product. And this one has survived and been very strong. And then it changes the agency. Like the whole agency begins to change because we realize this is our future. And so then how do we start changing our whole organization around this? And that's what's happening now.
And John, you sort of built on that from a crowdsourcing perspective, but I'd be very curious, how are you working with the media entities in terms of doing stuff for your clients? Because I would be interested in understanding, are your clients coming to you with the media idea already, or is that something you're also crowdsourcing as well as the creative?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, we're certainly an idea shop, and that's kind of, I would say, our strength. It's a new model. We're trying to figure out how to work with people. We've been doing some work with MPG on some things, as part of the Havas network, which has been really great. And we're always looking for people to experiment with, and I think that's what's important right now, right? When you can't see the future and it's very complicated, the best thing to do is experiment. Colin's perspective I think was right on. I've sat on a bunch of boards. I've kind of been on both sides of the fence. So I just got off the board of Legit, which we sold to Federated Media. And I would say that being in Boulder, especially with all the startups, the biggest criticism I would have from looking at technology companies is that there's such a focus on making, which is awesome, right? There's no focus on starting somewhere with a client. So it's like building these beautiful sandcastles, but then is it really relevant? And I think that's what's really important, and that's what I always try to think about. It's like, even if we're trying to figure out how to work with other media companies or other folks, it's like, let's just start somewhere. Let's just start on a small project. Let's see how it grows. Let's not sit around and theorize and figure out kind of the most beautiful possibility, right? It's just got to start to work.
Apparently, yesterday here, one of the things that came out of one of the sessions was that it really isn't about ideas, it's about execution. I was listening to that this morning, I thought, wait a minute, it's gotta be a balance of the two. And I think that's what I'm hearing every single one of you talk about here this morning. Go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that's really fascinating is that execution has become commoditized, right? So if you look at the latest Wired magazine, and when I wrote Baked In with Alex, we kind of dreamed about the idea that 3D printers were going to be on every desk. And you see the MakerBot Replicator 2 on the front of Wired magazine. Well, in the idea of making products, the execution of making products has been commoditized. It's a push of a button on your computer now. So to me, I would say the ideas are way more important, that execution is going to be further commoditized by technology.
Yeah, and I think Gaston would agree with you based on what he was saying just before we came up. So we're going to open it up for audience questions in just a couple seconds, but one other area that I just wanted to touch on briefly, because John is also the Chief Innovation Officer for Havas, and Colleen is part of Havas, and obviously Digitas is part of Publicis. Where do the holding companies fit in all this? And I know that there are a lot of people who would like to change that dynamic, but they're obviously still a big part of what we do. And I also know that there are some people who left holding companies on purpose. So talk about the holding companies and where they fit into all this. Whoever wants to start.
I'll take a cut at it.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think it's, I've hopped in and out, taken investment from Omnicom. I spent last year building the IPG Media Lab just down the street. And now I'm part of a company that is not even part of the landscape. We, ironically, were acquired by a global technology firm. I think there's a freedom and a downside to both sides of the equation. You know, I think sort of to riff on what you were saying, I think being part of a holding company can put you in a certain position in a value chain. So you're viewed as the media buyer, and therefore you don't have license to speak at the product creation table. Much as everyone would say, oh, that's great, you should have a voice. The way it works is products are created, stories are conceived by the creative shops, and media is purchased, and that conversation happens with procurement. You can break that mold when you're not part of the structure, and that's kind of nice.
I think there's the difference between what you think it is and what it won't. And you know, this is my sort of thing, like my year of revelations. But what you think it will be is a pipeline to clients. What you think it will be is shared services that enable you to scale up quickly and more cost effectively. I think what the holding company thinks it will be is a way to not leave money on the table. And I think that it is, all of those things can be true. I think that the thing that holding companies have to remember is that they have invested or taken equity stakes in these small companies as a bet hedged against the future, and they must resist managing them like a P&L from the past. And it's not enough to just exchange those small pieces. You are doing this because you're not trying to grow a competitor, you're trying to forge the future of your business. And I think that seeing grace in something that does not yet offer you massive value is one of the keys to these relationships.
John, Colin, Ty.
Can I chime in on holding companies? I feel like, so I think two things. One is, from a client perspective, I can see in a really complex world how it might be attractive to want to go to a holding company because it's this great Tinker Toy set of all these cool capabilities. And I think that's the promise of holding companies. And I think in some cases holding companies manage to deliver on that. But I think that they deliver on it much less than they say they can and that they would actually like to. And I think that's because they've been built without any kind of internal process or structure that enables collaboration between the elements. There's missing connective tissue inside holding companies. And there's no financial incentive for any of those companies to actually work together. In fact, their financial incentive is to try to kill each other and get as much of the budget as they possibly can because that's how they're rewarded. And effort follows money. And so until holding companies are able to take a more progressive point of view about the way that they reward and incentivize collaboration inside, they're going to be stuck. But I think that's possible. I mean, I'm optimistic because I'm a believer in collaboration, and I think there's a real space for holding companies that learn how to do that better.
I agree with that. I think the one area where we're trying to drive that collaboration is actually through the clients as opposed to at the holding company level. In other words, clients will reward a team for the work at the end of the year through a bonus, as opposed to us trying to figure out how to take something from my agency and give it to somebody else at another. So I think that's going to be as we move forward, the way that we're going to try to increase that collaboration. The other opportunity, I mean, I think I see it from the client side too, as a real promise that you can bring real assets together and help me solve this very complex world. As we go through that, it's like anything else. You know, I'm one of 10 kids, and I seem to fight much more aggressively with my brothers and sisters than I ever did with my friends. And so it's interesting when you're in these situations that you can get along better with people who are not inside your agency versus outside. And my hope is that when we start doing these things with our clients in terms of rewarding collaboration internally, that'll change.
Yeah, I often, when I talk to clients about collaboration, say, you know, there are 3 ways to do it, and the one that is most common, unfortunately, is this. I've just hired a bunch of agencies, now go collaborate. Because that's kind of like putting 10 cats in a bag and waiting a couple days to see who's alive. As opposed to somebody's got to be the sort of voice of reason that says, no, this is the way we're going to do it. Whether that's the client or whether that's somebody who's been assigned by the client to be that leader, somebody still has to do that.
Surely that is the relevance of an agency of record role moving forward, if there is one, which is not making the PMO office the client's problem, but getting the best of everything and servicing it forward instead of trying to sell the funniest idea for your 30-second spot.
Yeah.
Did you
So
want to?
a couple of perspectives, because it's been really fascinating playing this dual role. I would say at the victors and spoils level, we are oftentimes, and a few of our clients call us their mistress of record. So when they need, so for instance, we've got a big CPG client who for years tried to get, what they thought, because of the advancement of technology, discounts on fees, new teams, new technologies, lots of, stalling, not getting it done. They gave us a pretty big assignment and said, if you don't change, VNS is going to get a lot more of your stuff, and welcome to the new world. This is how you're going to play. Within the week, they met every one of the requirements. New team, 20% discount on their fees, and changed their team. So I think anything new, right, that's kind of the role we play. It's kind of a accelerator of collaboration, right? And clients, I think, are using new things to do that. Like, hey, if you don't like the way it's going, then we'll bring in Socialistic, or we'll bring in and let's see how that goes, right? So it's been client motivated, and I've seen that from the VNS perspective. From the Havas perspective, being in the CIO role for the last 6 months, there's no doubt that holding companies need to evolve, right? They need to be more nimble. They need to figure out the compensation issue. I think, Ty, that you talked about is the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. When there's no incentive, we all individually, right? I have 2 11-year-old boys. They operate how they're compensated, right? If there are rules, they operate to the rules. And we do the same thing. If we're running a company, that's what we do. If the incentivization in any company and structure is to eat what you kill, own everything, don't share, that's what you're going to do. It's not the personalities, it's the systems that are set up. So to me, the future has got to be a little bit more, it's the Eric Schmidt rule at Google of 70-20-10, right? 70% you've got to be super efficient and run the companies, the existing businesses as well as you can. 20% you've got to make sure those are innovating on a regular basis and evolving, and 10% has to be the Wild West. And in my sense is that the future of a holding company is going to be really a mixture between a good, structured, collaborative business that has less silos, that are less federations of independent states, but more, here is a big group of great talent that we can deploy really well towards client problems. Let's get the best people against the best, briefs to solve that problem, with a venture capital perspective as well. It's like what bets can we make in the future to make sure that we're on the right playing field. So
Thanks. I think we have some questions.
Yes, we have some questions. Anyone has questions, just raise your hand. We have microphones that we will get to you. I've got a question that came from the audience by text. Do you see learnings derived from the digital space influencing the television industry and the metrics TV uses to define success?
So, yeah, I would say definitely. I think that's a big question. And I'm probably least qualified on the panel to answer it as I think about it, but I'll take a whack. Like, I look at what's going on at YouTube. Like, I wasn't even really all that familiar with what YouTube is up to lately, and I think as I dig into it further, it's a game changer. Like, first of all, the fact that anybody anywhere can make a living by putting videos up on YouTube if they can get eyeballs on them is a game changer. So you can monetize your creations. Back to democratization. Has been in place, but they've now made it much easier. And then with technologies like TrueView, the fact that the stuff that is more popular floats higher in the system and the stuff that is less viewed sinks lower changes the rules of creation of marketing messages. And it begins to change behavior. It begins to change the way you think about making those messages. It changes the economics that underpin the making of all those messages. I think it's massive. And I think ultimately it's all driven by data, which is a good thing. Like, measurement is good. And the days of just going, yeah, well, Nielsen says it's so it must be so, are kind of over.
Well, there's also the intersection of social with TV.
Sorry if there's anybody from
You're right.
Nielsen here.
No, just quite
Social and TV's intersection is really playing a big role in how we make decisions.
Quite tangibly, I think what it does is it just turns it upside down. You still need the exposure that television gives you. It takes it from television being the thing that enough eyeballs are on that you can put your message in there, and it takes it into the program being the social object around which your audience wants to have a conversation that you can engage yourself in as a brand, and then that is the socialization of. So it's just we require these social objects to have the discussions, and I think now the commercials are becoming the trailers for those larger interactions, and that's really what they do.
Just to throw one last one in there, I think from a non-marketing perspective, a lot of our work focuses on building new products in the interface between TV and interactive. So everything from Roku to Time Warner Cable. We built things for the NCAA, and the interesting thing, to your point about, let's say, YouTube, is that in many cases, the paradigms are about getting out of the way of pure programming and viewer intent. And it raises a lot of questions about how will that translate through in the viewing paradigms to come. The traditional equation of advertising sponsoring what people want to see is, as we know, going to change as mandated.
I think, Joe, did you?
Yeah, so I want to thank you all for being here. I think you really kind of hit the mark with this question, and I think it's great that Digitas is the most traditional agency on the panel. So you're the greatest storytellers in the world, the greatest definers of brands, but I want to ask you, is there a need for us to collectively try and tell what an agency brand is? Because it's getting kind of amorphous, and in a world now where you have McKinsey and Bain on one end and Google and Apple on the other end, in the old days we knew what JWT and Ogilvy were and Crispin. Are we doing our industry a disservice by creating all of these kind of open-ended definitions of what is an agency, and should we come together around some common, pillars?
Let me just jump off on that one, because this has been the discussion since I got to the American Association of Advertising Agencies for 4 years. And every time we talk about should we change that name, nobody can come up with the new word. So at least from the industry perspective, I can tell you that discussion is ongoing, but no one's come up with the solution. And if anybody up here on this august panel has any solution, I'd love to hear it, because that's something we've been struggling with.
I don't have a solution. I have a maybe better answer an answer I would be happier with than the one I gave before. And it might be a more typical answer for a person with a creative background, but I really believe it. Like, we live in this time of change. There's a tremendous amount in the world that is changing. There's a lot in the world that is not changing at all. People are not fundamentally changing. And story and storytelling are fundamental to the way human beings process information. It's how our brains work. It's like how story is sort of a software that runs on the human brain. And that's not going to change anytime soon. And so keepers of the story of brands and businesses, I think is a good role to aspire to as an agency. I don't think that's going to go away. And I think the telling of the story, or to use maybe a term that I'm happier with, the doing of the story, because I think really it's about doing as opposed to telling, is going to be in the hands of lots of different people. But being the keeper and the sort of owner of what that story is and how it works, I think is a role that isn't going to go away. And it's very hard to have that role. Some companies are able to do that internally, but a lot are not. You know, there are a lot of people who have financial backgrounds that are running businesses today that don't have an appreciation for the power of story. And I think that business never goes away.
I think I'll answer it quickly, but I just feel so strongly about this that I do think it is damaging to the agency networks that we are spinning off on the sides. And I think everyone on this panel almost has endeavored to do it in an integrated way and defend an August network. I think that it's not in the personality, in the behavior of a market to leave a market unserviced and to leave opportunity on the table. And I think that we are winning out because we see opportunities that are being left and we're picking them up. I think that it's not healthy just to have one way to go to market. I think it does help the entire industry that we have several ways to go to market. But I do think that it's probably not the happiest thing for the holding companies.
You can't see it, but you have a virtual line of questions that I have here. If we do these rapidly, I'd like to try to get through them if you can. How threatened are agencies of crowdsourcing media companies, and do you see them adapting as a creative resource to help them get and retain more clients?
I would say that we are not intimidated or worried about crowdsourcing at all. We leverage it. We have a platform inside of Digitas that we leverage. We then take that platform inside to the Publicis group that we leverage for ideas. We take ideas from the outside all the time. So we are not at all, and in fact, as an agency, we were one of the first to embrace crowdsourcing, and we've worked with Victors and Spoils quite a bit at several clients. So we're very much open and embrace crowdsourcing.
Okay, we have more questions, but we're not going to be able to get to them. So Nancy, I'll turn that over to you.
Oh, okay, so we're done. So I'll just. Okay, I just want to thank all of you guys so much. It's really lovely to have you here and such different perspectives. And thank you. So.